The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipping through the mail slot of Cordelia Ashwood's penthouse like a ghost from a life she'd buried 8 years ago. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering that probably cost more per square inch than most people spent on dinner. Westridge Academy Class of 2014. 10-year reunion. She stood in the center of her living room, a space so aggressively minimal it felt like living inside a held breath, and traced the gold crest with one finger. The skyline of Manhattan glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, a constellation of ambition and broken promises. Her phone buzzed. Magnolia Fletcher contact photo frozen mid-laugh from a weekend 3 years ago when laughter still came easily to both of them. "Tell me you're not going." Cora set the invitation on the marble island perfectly centered. "I haven't decided." "Liar! You decided the second you saw his name on the planning committee." Maggie's voice carried the particular exasperation of someone who'd held your hair back during the worst moments and refused to let you pretend they never happened. Donovan Thorne is a narcissistic predator who spent 4 years convincing you that you were lucky he tolerated your existence. Going to that reunion is like volunteering for your own execution. The apartment was silent except for the whisper of climate control, the building's mechanical breathing. Cora had chosen this place specifically for its insularity. 47th floor. Nobody above or below who might hear the nights she still woke up gasping from dreams where she was 22 and stupid and so desperately in love, it felt like a terminal condition. "He thinks I'm working retail in Queens." Because that's what his private investigator's preliminary report told him before you had Augustus shut down the surveillance. Maggie paused, and Cora could hear ice clinking in a glass, the familiar ritual of her best friend's evening unwind. "Cora, you've built something extraordinary. You turned $50,000 into a fortune that makes his entire existence look like a rounding error. Why give him the satisfaction of seeing you at all?" Cora picked up the invitation again, held it to the light. Reunion from the Latin reunire, to bring together again, to make one again. As if 8 years could be collapsed into a ballroom and an open bar and a DJ playing the same songs that had soundtracked their youth. "Because he doesn't know." She kept her voice level, conversational, the tone she used in boardrooms when she was about to destroy someone's quarterly projections. "He has no idea who I am, what I've become. He's going to stand there in his custom suit and perform his magnanimity, and everyone will eat it up because that's what he does. He controls narratives. And you want to rewrite the ending. I want him to understand what he threw away." Cora set the invitation down, final this time. Decision made. "I want him to feel it." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When you burn down someone's world, make sure you're not standing in the blast radius." After they hung up, Cora opened her laptop. The screen illuminated, casting pale light across her face. VH Capital's internal dashboard loaded a symphony of numbers and projections that represented 6 years of 18-hour days and calculated risks that would have given cardiac episodes to traditional wealth managers. Portfolio value $2.1 billion. She'd stopped feeling anything when she looked at that number. It was just data now, proof of concept evidence that she'd been right and everyone who'd dismissed her had been catastrophically wrong. She navigated to a folder marked simply T. Inside a dossier that Augustus Whitmore's investigators had compiled over the past 3 months. Donovan Thorne, 34, founding partner of Thorne & Associates, a litigation firm that had made its name defending pharmaceutical companies against class action suits. Annual revenue approximately $15 million, impressive by most standards, a rounding error by hers. Currently engaged to Bridget Carrington, 28, director of marketing at a mid-tier consultancy, the same woman who'd been a 20-year-old intern when Donovan had first started fucking her in his office, while Cora waited at home with dinner getting cold. There were photographs. Donovan at charity galas. Donovan speaking at legal conferences. Donovan with his arm around Bridget at the opening of some gallery in Chelsea, both of them dressed in the kind of studied casual that required a stylist. He looked older, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during the divorce proceedings. Good. She hoped every single one of them hurt. The next file made her hands still on the trackpad. Application for Series B funding, Thorne and Associates. Submitted to VH Capital on September 14th. She'd reviewed it personally on October 1st, sitting in this exact spot, reading Donovan's carefully crafted pitch about expanding into intellectual property litigation, the market opportunity, the team's expertise. He'd even included a paragraph about his commitment to mentorship, how he believed in lifting others up as he climbed. She'd laughed out loud. Then she'd stamped the application denied and signed it herself. Full legal name, CEO and sole proprietor of VH Capital. The rejection letter had gone out the next morning. Donovan had no idea who'd turned him down. VH Capital's corporate structure was a maze of LLCs and holding companies, her identity protected by layers of legal insulation that Augustus had engineered with the precision of a watchmaker. But he knew VH Capital was solvent, serious, and exactly the kind of investor who could transform his moderately successful firm into something that might finally prove to his father that he wasn't a disappointment. The old man had been a federal judge, apparently, and Donovan had spent their entire marriage trying to escape that shadow while simultaneously measuring himself against it. Cora closed the laptop. She had work in the morning, a conference call with a startup founder in Seattle who was 3 months from running out of runway and too proud to admit she was drowning. But sleep felt impossible, her mind already choreographing the reunion, imagining the moment when understanding would crack across Donovan's face like ice giving way under weight. She walked to the windows, pressed her palm against the glass. Cold even through the triple-pane energy efficiency. Somewhere out there, maybe 20 blocks south, Donovan was probably in his Tribeca loft, probably in bed with Bridget, probably not thinking about his ex-wife at all. Why would he? In his version of their story, he was the protagonist, the self-made man who'd overcome a youthful mistake, marrying too early, choosing poorly, getting dragged down by someone who lacked his drive and vision. He'd said as much during the divorce proceedings. Her lawyer had tried to argue for a percentage of his future earnings, given that her grandmother's inheritance had paid for his law school tuition, his bar exam prep course, the first year of office rent, when he'd hung out his shingle. Donovan's attorney had shut that down with surgical precision. Mrs. Thorne made a gift to her husband during the marriage. She cannot now characterize voluntary support as an investment-deserving return. The judge had agreed. Cora had walked out of that courthouse with $50,000, a third of what her grandmother had left her, a tenth of what Donovan would bill in his first major case 6 months later. She'd sat in her car in the parking garage for an hour, hands on the wheel, wondering if this was what drowning felt like when you were still breathing. That night she'd gone home to the apartment she was subletting in Astoria, a fourth-floor walk-up that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs, and she'd opened her laptop. She'd started reading about cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, the wild promises of decentralization and disruption. It had felt like science fiction, like someone's fever dream of how money might work in a future that would never arrive. But the math was sound. The technology was real. And most importantly, Bitcoin was trading at $7,200 per coin, down from its December peak of $19,000, which meant everyone who'd gotten rich was taking profits, and everyone who'd missed the boat was convinced they'd dodged a scam. She'd bought 6.9 Bitcoin and 104 Ethereum with her entire settlement. Then she'd gotten a job bartending at a hotel in Midtown 4 nights a week, cash tips that kept her in ramen and Subway fare while she taught herself everything she could about distributed ledger systems and tokenomics and the peculiar psychology of speculative markets. Donovan had sent her an email 8 months after the divorce, subject line, "checking in." The body was 3 sentences of performance empathy. "I hope you're doing well. I know the transition has been difficult. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out." She'd deleted it without responding. That had been November 2018. By then her initial $50,000 had grown to $230,000, and she was already beginning to understand the shape of the future she was building, the empire she would construct from the scraps he'd left her. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back to the present, to the penthouse and the city and the reunion that was now 6 days away. Augustus Whitmore, this time calling at 11:47 p.m. because he was a man who treated sleep as an inefficiency to be minimized. "I've confirmed the logistics. His voice was gravel and expensive cigars, decades of courtroom combat that had left him wealthy and alone and apparently dedicated to making Cora's revenge as architecturally perfect as possible. VH Capital's CEO will arrive at 8:30 p.m. precisely when Mr. Thorne finishes his prepared remarks. I've obtained a copy of his speech incidentally. It's remarkable how thoroughly he's planning to humiliate you. Read me the relevant section. Papers rustled. Then Augustus's voice, neutral and clinical. Quote, "My ex-wife Cordelia is here tonight and I want to acknowledge her. We had good times once before life took us in different directions. I heard she's working retail now, living modestly in Queens. I still help her out when I can send money quarterly, make sure she's okay, because that's what you do for people you once loved, even when they couldn't keep up with your journey." Unquote. The words landed like punches, each one calibrated for maximum damage disguised as compassion. Donovan had always been exceptional at that particular cruelty, the kind that let him play the victim and the hero simultaneously while casting her as the cautionary tale. Perfect. Cora kept her voice steady, refused to give Augustus the satisfaction of hearing it crack. Let him deliver every word. Let him think he's winning right up until the moment he realizes he's been performing his own execution. The security team will be in place by 7 p.m. I've arranged for 2 additional investigators to document everything: video, audio, photographs. If this is going to be a crucifixion, we might as well have the receipts. After they hung up, Cora stood in the center of her living room for a long time, breathing in the recycled air of her fortress, this place she'd built to keep out everyone who might hurt her again. The invitation sat on the marble island, innocuous and lethal. She thought about Maggie's warning about blast radiuses and collateral damage. But some burns were necessary. Some fires had to be lit. The next morning she met Augustus at a coffee shop on Madison Avenue, the kind of aggressively minimalist establishment where a cappuccino cost $9 and came in a cup that looked like contemporary sculpture. He was already seated when she arrived, 73 years old, and still dressing like he had a Supreme Court argument at noon, 3-piece suit in charcoal wool shoes, polished to a military shine. "You look tired." He didn't stand, just gestured to the chair across from him. "I didn't sleep well. Revenge rarely comes with good rest." He pushed a manila folder across the table. "Updated intelligence. Your ex-husband's financial situation is more precarious than he's letting anyone know. The firm has $800,000 in outstanding debt, mostly from an office expansion last year that hasn't generated the expected returns. His personal burn rate is approximately $45,000 a month mortgage on the Tribeca loft. Bridget's rather expensive tastes country club memberships he can't afford to drop because they're where he networks. He needs the VH Capital investment not to grow, but to survive." Cora opened the folder, scanned the bank statements and credit reports that Augustus's investigators had obtained through methods she'd learned not to ask about. The numbers painted a portrait of a man living at the absolute edge of his means, maintaining the appearance of success through an increasingly elaborate series of financial contortions. The IRS investigation. Proceeding exactly as planned. The forensic accountant found irregularities in his tax filings for the past 3 years, unreported income from settlement kickbacks, deductions that don't survive scrutiny, shell company transactions that look suspiciously like money laundering. "I submitted the findings to the Criminal Investigation Division last week. They've opened a preliminary inquiry." Cora closed the folder, slid it back. "I don't want him to know about that until after the reunion. Let him think his biggest problem is losing the VH Capital funding." Augustus allowed himself the ghost of a smile, the expression of a man who'd spent 50 years destroying people in depositions and still found joy in a perfectly executed strategy. "You've become quite ruthless." "I had a good teacher." She'd met Augustus in the spring of 2019 when her cryptocurrency portfolio had grown to $8 million, and she'd realized that keeping that kind of wealth in digital wallets and offshore exchanges was a recipe for either getting hacked or accidentally triggering a federal investigation. He'd been recommended by another investor, a woman who'd made her fortune in biotech, and spoke about Augustus the way people spoke about finding religion. Their first meeting had been in his office, a corner suite in a building overlooking Bryant Park walls, lined with law books that probably cost more than Cora's yearly bartending income. He'd listen to her story without interruption, fingers steepled expression, unreadable. When she'd finished, he'd asked one question, "What do you want?" "I want to build something that can't be taken away from me." She'd surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I want to be so successful that my ex-husband chokes on his own smugness. I want every person who looked at me with pity during that divorce to understand they were catastrophically wrong about who I was and what I was capable of." Augustus had nodded slowly. "Then we should discuss incorporating your holdings and establishing a proper corporate structure. Also, you should probably quit bartending. It's beneath your current net worth and frankly dangerous. The kind of people who rob hotel bars in this city are not discriminating about their targets." She'd hired him that afternoon, paid his retainer with a wire transfer that had probably made his accountant weep with joy, and spent the next 8 months learning how wealthy people protected their wealth. Trusts and LLCs and corporate veils, asset protection strategies that turned money into something fluid and untouchable, capable of flowing through jurisdictions and legal structures like water finding cracks in stone. By the end of 2019, VH Capital existed as a fully formed entity, a Delaware corporation with Cora as its sole shareholder and Augustus as general counsel. The name had been Maggie's suggestion. Victoria Helen, her grandmother's first and middle names, the woman who'd left her that initial inheritance with a note that Cora still kept in a safe deposit box. Use this to become someone who doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. Now sitting across from Augustus in this overpriced coffee shop, Cora felt the weight of those words like a physical pressure. She'd become exactly what her grandmother had hoped for, and it felt nothing like she'd imagined. Success was supposed to be satisfying, transformative, the ultimate vindication. Instead, it was just lonely, a tower she'd built so high that everyone on the ground looked like ants. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Augustus's voice cut through her thoughts. "Once you reveal yourself, there's no walking it back. Donovan will know, and he'll tell people, and your anonymity will be compromised." "I'm not hiding anymore." Cora met his eyes, held them. "I've spent 6 years building this in secret because I was afraid of exactly this kind of attention. But I'm done being afraid of him." Augustus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then I suppose we should make sure the performance is flawless." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Cora went through the motions of her regular schedule: investor calls, portfolio reviews, a site visit to a warehouse in Brooklyn that one of her real estate holdings was converting into luxury condos. But her mind was always half elsewhere, rehearsing the moment, imagining the look on Donovan's face when he finally understood. Maggie came over Thursday night with takeout and moral support, sprawling on Cora's couch with containers of Thai food and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than the dinner. "I still think you're insane." She speared a piece of chicken, pointed the fork at Cora. "But if you're going to do this, at least let me help you pick an outfit. You cannot show up to your own vindication wearing something from Target." "I'm wearing Target specifically. That's the whole point." "The point is he thinks you're poor. The point is not actually being poorly dressed." Maggie was already pulling up designer websites on her phone, scrolling through cocktail dresses with the focus of a general planning an invasion. "You need to look like someone who chose simplicity, not someone who couldn't afford complexity. There's a difference." They settled on a navy sheath dress from Eileen Fisher, expensive in an understated way that wouldn't register to anyone who wasn't paying attention, and a pair of shoes from Cora's own closet that looked department store but were actually Prada from 3 seasons ago. The effect was studied anonymity, the kind of outfit that let you disappear into any room while still maintaining a certain self-possessed elegance. "What about jewelry?" Cora pulled out a velvet box from her bedroom safe, opened it to reveal a single strand of pearls. Her grandmother's, the only thing she'd kept from the inheritance besides the money itself. "Perfect." Maggie fastened them around Cora's neck, adjusted the clasp. "You look like someone who doesn't need to prove anything." "Because I don't." "Liar." But Maggie was smiling, sad and proud at the same time. "You're about to prove everything. Just try not to enjoy it too much." The morning of the reunion, Cora woke early, ran 6 miles on the treadmill in her building's gym, came back to her apartment and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. She dried off, pulled on jeans and a sweater, made coffee she didn't drink. The hours stretched like taffy, elastic and endless. At 4 p.m., Augustus called with final confirmation. Security team in place, surveillance equipment tested, speech transcript verified, timing locked. 8:30 p.m. Precisely when Donovan would finish his prepared humiliation, the doors would open and Augustus would enter, and everything would change. At 6 p.m., Cora started getting dressed. The navy dress, the Prada shoes, the pearls. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple twist. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone who'd survived and succeeded and was about to burn down the past with the cold precision of a controlled demolition. The car service arrived at 7. Not her usual driver in the Bentley, but a rental sedan Honda Accord with cloth seats and a driver she'd hired for the evening specifically because he wouldn't recognize her. She climbed in the back, gave him the address for Westridge Country Club, watched the city slide past the windows. Traffic was light for a Friday evening. They made good time through Manhattan, across the bridge into the manicured suburbs of Westchester, where people still believed that money could insulate them from consequence. The country club appeared like a vision from another era, all brick and brass, and the kind of old money aesthetic that whispered rather than shouted its wealth. Cora paid the driver, tipped him in cash, told him she'd call when she needed pickup. Then she stood in the parking lot for a moment looking at the building, the warm light spilling from windows, the sound of music and laughter already audible. Her phone buzzed. "Maggie, you've got this. Remember who you are." And Augustus, in position, waiting for your signal. She typed back a single word to each, "ready." Then Cordelia Ashwood walked through the doors of her past, head high, heart steady, and let the ending begin. The ballroom was exactly as she'd remembered. High-ceiling chandeliers that probably predated the moon landing walls, paneled in dark wood that absorbed sound and gave everything a hushed cathedral quality. Circular tables scattered across the floor, a bar along one wall, already doing brisk business, a DJ in the corner, playing something from their senior year, nostalgia compressed into 4-minute intervals. People turned as she entered. Not everyone, not immediately, but enough. The whispers started like wind through grass, spreading and building, and she could track the exact moment when someone recognized her and passed the information along. "That's Cordelia Ashwood. You know Donovan's ex-wife. I heard she's working retail now. Poor thing, she looks so ordinary." Cora let them look, let them assess and dismiss. She'd spent 6 years learning that real power was invisible, that the people who announced themselves were the ones who needed constant validation. She was done needing anything from anyone in this room. Maggie materialized from the crowd, pulled her into a hug that felt like armor. "Okay, he's here. Bridget's here. They're holding court by the bar, like they're presiding over their own coronation. Are you absolutely sure?" "I'm sure." They made their way to a table near the back, out of the main flow of traffic, but with a clear sightline to the stage. Cora sat, accepted this glass of sparkling water Maggie pressed into her hand, and waited. Donovan arrived exactly when she'd known he would, fashionably late enough to make an entrance, not so late as to seem desperate for attention. He wore a suit that probably cost what Cora used to make in 3 months of bartending charcoal, with subtle pinstripes perfectly tailored to his frame. Bridget was attached to his arm like an expensive accessory, red dress, emerald-cut diamond that caught the light every time she gestured, which was often. They worked the room with practiced efficiency, stopping at each table, Donovan's hand on shoulders and backs, the easy physical confidence of someone who'd never learned that not everyone welcomed his touch. Cora watched him laugh at someone's joke, watched him lean in to hear a story, watched him perform the role he'd been rehearsing his entire life. Successful, generous, beloved. He hadn't seen her yet. Or if he had, he was saving the acknowledgement, letting the anticipation build. That was his style, the careful orchestration of every social interaction to maximize his centrality. The DJ transitioned to something slower and couples drifted toward the dance floor. Bridget tugged Donovan in that direction, but he shook his head, gestured toward the bar. She pouted, theatrical and practiced, and he kissed her forehead in a way that managed to be both affectionate and dismissive. "I genuinely cannot believe she's about to marry him." Maggie's voice was low, venomous. "That woman has a graduate degree in marketing and somehow missed every single red flag. She sees the flags. She just thinks she can use them to her advantage," which was true according to the surveillance Augustus's team had compiled. Bridget Carrington was ambitious in the particular way of people who'd grown up adjacent to wealth without ever quite possessing it themselves. Her father was a mid-level executive at a pharmaceutical company. Her mother taught Pilates at an upscale gym. They'd given her private school and tennis lessons and the vocabulary of privilege without the trust fund to back it up. Donovan represented her shortcut, the express elevator to the life she felt she deserved. That she was apparently also sleeping with his business partner and planning to divorce him after establishing community property rights just added layers to the irony. 8:15. Cora checked her watch, the Patek Philippe that had been her first major purchase after VH Capital crossed the billion-dollar threshold, hidden under her sleeve, invisible to everyone except herself. A reminder that she was already living in the future these people were still trying to reach. The DJ faded the music. Someone tapped a microphone, and feedback squealed through the speakers. The crowd noise dimmed, people turning toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Todd, Berkshire class president then, and apparently still committed to the role, bounded up the steps with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. "Welcome, welcome, Westridge class of 2014. Can you believe it's been 10 years? Applause whoops, the predictable enthusiasm of people determined to pretend the past decade had been kinder than it actually was. "We've got an amazing night planned: dinner, dancing, a tribute video that I promise will make you cry. But first I want to bring up someone who needs no introduction, a true success story from our class. Someone who's shown us all what hard work and dedication can achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, Donovan Thorne." The applause intensified as Donovan climbed the stage, waving like he'd just won an election. He took the microphone from Todd, waited for the noise to settle, and then smiled, that particular smile Cora had once thought was charming and now recognized as the expression of a predator about to feed. His eyes found hers across the ballroom, and for just a moment something flickered in his expression. Surprise maybe, or calculation, or the beginning of whatever performance he'd prepared. Then he started speaking, and Cora stopped breathing, and the ending she'd been building for 6 years began to unfold exactly as planned. Donovan's voice filled the ballroom with the practiced resonance of a man who'd learned to command courtrooms and juries, every syllable calibrated for maximum impact. "It's incredible to be here with all of you. 10 years since we walked across that stage, 10 years of building lives and careers and becoming the people we always hoped we'd be." He paused, let the moment breathe, smiled with the warmth of someone who'd never experienced genuine self-doubt. Some of us have had the privilege of extraordinary success. Others have taken different paths, faced different challenges. Both journeys have value. The qualification landed like a blade wrapped in velvet. Cora felt Maggie's hand find hers under the table, squeeze hard enough to hurt. "I look around this room and I see doctors, entrepreneurs, teachers, parents, people who've worked incredibly hard to build something real. And I'm humbled to be counted among you." Donovan's gaze swept the crowd, pausing on faces acknowledging applause that built like a wave. "My firm, Thorne and Associates, just celebrated its 8th anniversary. We're blessed to represent clients across the country fighting for justice in some of the most complex litigation this industry has ever seen." Blessed. The word choice was deliberate, the language of someone who wanted credit for success while maintaining plausible deniability about pride. Cora had heard him use that exact phrasing in interviews on podcasts, in the TED Talk he'd given about resilience and professional excellence that had somehow failed to mention the inheritance money that had funded his entire foundation. But success isn't just professional, it's personal. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, surrounding yourself with people who elevate you, building a life that reflects your values. His hand extended toward Bridget, who'd positioned herself at a front table diamond, catching the chandelier light like a signal fire. "I'm incredibly fortunate to have found my partner, my equal, someone who challenges me every day to be better than I was yesterday." Bridget beamed, performed the role of devoted fiancée with the precision of someone who'd studied the part. The crowd made appreciative noises, the collective sound of people witnessing what they believed was genuine romance. Donovan's expression shifted, clouds passing across sun. Of course, the path here wasn't always smooth. I made mistakes, especially early on. I married young, too young probably, to someone I cared about deeply but who ultimately wanted different things from life. Cora's spine went rigid, every muscle locking into position. This was it. The moment Augustus had warned her about the performance Donovan had choreographed to maximize his martyrdom while demolishing whatever remained of her reputation. "My ex-wife Cordelia is actually here tonight." He scanned the ballroom, found her in the back corner, and his smile acquired an edge that might have been concern or might have been cruelty depending on how generous the observer felt. "Cora, stand up. Don't be shy." The request was a command disguised as invitation, the same tone he'd used throughout their marriage whenever he wanted to display her at firm events, show her off like proof of his humanity, while simultaneously making clear she existed as an extension of his identity rather than a person with autonomous existence. She stood, slowly, deliberately meeting his eyes across the space between them. Let him think this was difficult. Let him believe he'd caught her unprepared and vulnerable. "There she is." Donovan's voice carried warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "We had some good years, Cora and I. We were kids building a life from nothing, me working 80-hour weeks studying for the bar, her supporting us however she could. Those early years teach you things about yourself, about what you're capable of enduring." The phrase choice was surgical. Supporting us however she could, as if her grandmother's $180,000 had been spare change she'd found in coat pockets rather than the entire financial foundation of his legal education. As if the job offers she'd turned down, the graduate program she'd deferred, and then abandoned the paintings she'd stopped creating because he'd needed her time and attention, and emotional labor had been freely given gifts rather than sacrifices he'd demanded and then forgotten. Life took us in different directions eventually. Cora decided the struggle wasn't for her, and I respected that choice. Different people have different thresholds for what they're willing to endure in pursuit of their dreams. He paused, manufactured sympathy settling over his features like a mask. "I heard she's working retail now, living modestly in Queens. And you know what? There's dignity in any honest work. I genuinely believe that." The condescension was so thick Cora could taste it, metallic and bitter. He was rewriting their entire history in real time, casting himself as the ambitious partner held back by her lack of vision, positioning her current circumstances as evidence of some fundamental deficiency in character or capability. "I still help her out when I can." The lie came easily, smooth as aged whiskey. "Send money quarterly, make sure she's okay, because that's what you do for people you once loved, even when they couldn't keep pace with your journey. Even when they chose comfort over growth." Chose comfort over growth. The phrase detonated in Cora's chest, rage blooming white-hot behind her ribs. She'd chosen nothing except to believe his promises, to invest her inheritance in his future, to subordinate her identity to his ambition, because he'd convinced her that his success would be their success, that building him up was the same as building a partnership. The applause started scattered, and then consolidated, people responding to the narrative he'd constructed, the story of a generous man still caring for the wife who hadn't been strong enough to match his trajectory. Cora saw faces turning toward her, expressions ranging from pity to contempt to schadenfreude, and she understood with crystalline clarity that Donovan had won this room, had shaped their perception so completely that anything she said now would be dismissed as bitterness or delusion. Maggie's hand tightened around hers, nails digging crescents into skin. "Breathe. Remember the plan. He's giving you everything you need." Cora sat back down, let her shoulders curve forward slightly, played the part of someone diminished by public exposure. Let him think he'd broken her. Let everyone think she was exactly what he'd claimed, a cautionary tale, proof that some people simply lacked the constitution for extraordinary achievement. Donovan continued, pivoting smoothly into the rest of his prepared remarks. "Which brings me to tonight's other exciting news. Thorne & Associates is entering a significant growth phase. We're finalizing a major investment partnership with VH Capital, a firm that shares our values and vision for the future of litigation. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Finalizing implied certainty implied that VH Capital had agreed to fund his expansion rather than rejecting his application 3 weeks ago with a terseness that had probably stung even Donovan's considerable ego. The CEO of VH Capital is actually supposed to join us here tonight, should be arriving any minute now, in fact. He checked his watch, expensive platinum that caught the light. This partnership represents everything I believe about building success through integrity, hard work, and surrounding yourself with people who share your commitment to excellence. Cora checked her own watch. 8:26. 4 minutes until Augustus entered, until the carefully constructed facade Donovan had spent the last 15 minutes building would collapse under the weight of reality. "So, I want to propose a toast." Donovan raised his champagne glass, and the crowd followed suit, the ballroom filling with the small sounds of glass and movement and fabric rustling. "To the class of 2014. To 10 years of growth and achievement. To the next decade being even better than the last. And to everyone in this room, may you always have the courage to pursue your biggest dreams and the wisdom to know when to let go of people who can't rise with you." The final barb landed exactly as intended, an epitaph for their marriage that positioned her as the weight he'd been forced to shed in order to ascend. The room erupted in applause and cheers, people drinking and congratulating Donovan and performing their enthusiasm for his success. Cora lifted her water glass, brought it to her lips without drinking, and counted seconds. 8:27. Donovan descended from the stage, immediately surrounded by well-wishers and old friends wanting proximity to his success. Bridget appeared at his side, possessive hand on his arm, performing the role of future wife with enough enthusiasm that it might have been genuine or might have been the most cynical kind of calculation. "That was even worse than Augustus's transcript suggested." Maggie's voice was low, furious. "He basically just announced to everyone here that you're a failure and he's your patron saint. I want to throw this water in his face." "Don't." Cora kept her eyes on Donovan, watched him work, the crowd shake hands, accept congratulations. "Let him enjoy it. The higher he climbs in the next 3 minutes, the farther he falls." 8:28. Cora pulled out her phone, typed a single word to Augustus now. The response came immediately. Entering, she stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the ballroom's main entrance. Maggie followed a wingman in this carefully choreographed operation, and together they positioned themselves near the doors where they'd have a perfect view of whatever happened next. The ballroom doors opened. Augustus Whitmore entered like winter arriving, inevitable, implacable, impossible to ignore. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Charcoal Brioni, with subtle pinstripes shoes polished to a mirror shine that reflected the chandelier light. But it wasn't the clothes that commanded attention. It was the way he carried himself, the absolute certainty of someone who'd spent 5 decades destroying opposing counsel and had never once doubted his capacity to eviscerate anyone foolish enough to challenge him. The conversations near the entrance died first, spreading outward in concentric circles of silence as people turned to see who'd arrived with such gravitational presence. Whispers started immediately, building like static. "Is that Augustus Whitmore?" "The attorney, the one who argued that Supreme Court case. What's he doing here?" Donovan's head snapped toward the entrance, his conversation with a former classmate dying mid-sentence. His expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been the first tremor of concern before he buried it under professional composure. Augustus's eyes swept the ballroom with the detached assessment of a surgeon examining a patient, and then they landed on Cora. He walked toward her with deliberate purpose, the crowd parting automatically, everyone suddenly aware that whatever was happening was significant beyond the usual reunion dynamics. He stopped in front of her, inclined his head with old-fashioned formality. "Ms. Ashwood, my apologies for the delayed arrival. Traffic was more challenging than anticipated." His voice carried across the now silent ballroom, a courtroom projection that ensured everyone heard every syllable. Cora extended her hand, felt his grip firm, brief, professional. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for coming. The crowd's confusion was palpable, a collective uncertainty about what they were witnessing. Donovan had started moving toward them, Bridget trailing behind his expression, settling into the careful neutrality he used when facing unexpected developments in depositions. Augustus Whitmore. His hand extended toward Augustus in a gesture that managed to be both greeting and territorial claim. I don't believe we've met, though. Of course I know your reputation. Are you a friend of Cordelia's? Augustus looked at Donovan's offered hand for a long moment, long enough to make the refusal deliberate, long enough to transform the snub into a statement. Then he met Donovan's eyes with the kind of cold appraisal usually reserved for insects discovered in food. I'm here in a professional capacity, Mr. Thorne. I represent VH Capital. The name landed like a grenade. Donovan's face went through another rapid transformation. Surprise, confusion, a desperate attempt to recalculate his understanding of the situation. VH Capital, of course. We've been in discussions about the investment partnership for my firm. He recovered quickly, pivoted toward charm and confidence. This is excellent timing, actually. I was just telling everyone about our upcoming collaboration. Perhaps you'd like to join me on stage, make the announcement official. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Augustus's voice remained neutral, clinical, the tone of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis with professional detachment. VH Capital has not entered into any partnership with Thorne & Associates. In fact, your application for funding was denied on October 2nd. You should have received the rejection letter. Silence crashed over the ballroom like a physical force. Donovan's face drained of color, the confident facade cracking to reveal confusion and rising panic underneath. There must be some mistake. I was told the CEO was coming here tonight specifically to finalize. The CEO is here. Augustus turned, slightly gestured toward Cora. She has been present all evening. The confusion in the ballroom intensified, morphing into shocked speculation. Heads swiveled between Cora and Augustus, people trying to solve the equation to understand what was being implied. Donovan's eyes locked on Cora, and she watched comprehension trying to fight its way through his denial. Watched him resist the obvious conclusion because accepting it would mean everything he'd just said. Every word of his carefully constructed narrative had been built on catastrophic misunderstanding. I don't understand. But his voice had gone thin, uncertain, the courtroom confidence evaporating. Cordelia isn't, she doesn't. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Augustus's suggestion was courteous and completely inflexible, the voice of someone who'd already decided the course of action and was simply informing everyone else of their participation. No, Cora's voice cut through the confusion, clear and cold. She'd spent 6 years building to this moment, 6 years living in the shadow of Donovan's dismissal and condescension. She wasn't doing this behind closed doors. I think we should do this here, in front of everyone. She walked toward the stage, her footsteps the only sound in the ballroom. People scrambled back, creating a path, everyone suddenly aware they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would become legend in their social circles. Cora climbed the stairs, took the microphone that Todd Berkshire handed her with trembling hands, and looked out at the assembled faces of her past. Former classmates, people who'd known her when she was 22 and stupid with love, people who'd probably pitied her during the divorce, and definitely believed every word Donovan had just said about her current circumstances. Donovan asked VH Capital for $5 million. Her voice was steady, conversational, the tone she used in investor calls when she was about to explain why someone's business model was fundamentally flawed. He submitted the application on September 14th. I reviewed it personally on October 1st. She pulled out her phone, connected it to the presentation system that had been set up for the tribute video. The screen behind her illuminated, showing the VH Capital logo, clean, minimalist, professional. VH Capital is a private investment firm with $2.1 billion in assets under management. We focus on cryptocurrency, emerging technology, and commercial real estate. I founded it in May 2018, 6 weeks after my divorce was finalized, using the $50,000 Donovan so generously left me as seed capital. The number appeared on the screen, $2,100,000,000. and the ballroom erupted in gasps and exclamations, the collective sound of people's reality fracturing. Donovan stood frozen in the center of the floor, his face cycling through expressions too rapidly to name. Bridget had gone pale, her hand falling away from his arm, as if contact might contaminate her. "That $50,000. Cora let the phrase hang, made sure everyone heard it understood the connection. "I invested it in Bitcoin and Ethereum in May 2018. Bitcoin was trading at $7,200 per coin. Ethereum at $480. I bought 6.9 Bitcoin and 104 Ethereum." The screen changed, showing a timeline. Investment amounts, dates, portfolio values climbing in jagged vertical lines that made several people in the audience gasp. By December 2020, my initial investment was worth $1.8 million. By November 2021, $28 million. I sold, strategically diversified, built a portfolio that now generates approximately $18 million per month in returns. The numbers were obscene, impossible, the kind of wealth that existed only in abstractions for most people. Cora watched them land on the crowd, watched comprehension and disbelief war across faces. So when Donovan submitted his application for $5 million in funding, asking VH Capital to help him expand Thorne & Associates into intellectual property litigation, I read every word. I reviewed his financials, his business plan, his projections. She paused, let the moment stretch. And then I denied the application, personally, with my signature as CEO and sole proprietor of VH Capital. The screen changed again, showing the rejection letter. Donovan's name, the date, the single paragraph of professional dismissal, and at the bottom her signature, Cordelia R. Ashwood, CEO. Donovan didn't know it was me. VH Capital's corporate structure is deliberately opaque, multiple LLCs holding companies' legal insulation designed to protect my identity. I've spent 6 years building this in secret because I learned during our marriage that visibility makes you vulnerable, that showing people who you really are just gives them weapons to use against you. She found his eyes across the distance, held them. "You taught me that. Every time you dismissed my intelligence, my capabilities, my potential, every time you took credit for work I did, ideas, I contributed, success I helped build, you were very effective at making me believe I was nothing without you." The ballroom was silent now, the kind of profound quiet that comes when people realize they're witnessing something that will fundamentally alter how they understand their own history. "You gave that speech about how I chose comfort over growth, how I couldn't keep pace with your journey." Cora's voice remained level, clinical, refusing to let emotion crack through the ice. "The truth is that I spent 4 years sacrificing everything I was to build your career. My grandmother left me $180,000. I used it to pay for your law school tuition, your bar exam prep course, your first year of office rent. You called it a gift. Your lawyer called it voluntary support. The judge agreed." The screen showed bank records, now wire transfers, payment receipts, a documented trail of her money flowing into his education and career foundation. "When we divorced, you laughed about the $50,000 settlement. You told your lawyer I was lucky to get that much, that I'd contributed nothing to the marriage, that you'd built everything yourself." She let the words settle, let everyone remember Donovan's speech from 15 minutes ago, the story he'd told about his self-made success. "You were so convinced of your own narrative that you actually believed it. You forgot that your entire foundation was built on my inheritance, my support, my subordination of every dream I had to service yours." Donovan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. He looked like a man drowning in air, searching for something to grab onto and finding nothing solid. "I want everyone here to understand something." Cora's voice hardened, acquired edges. "I didn't build VH Capital for revenge. I built it because I had $50,000 and a choice. I could be bitter about losing my inheritance to my ex-husband's legal education, or I could prove that I never needed him in the first place, that every condescending thing he said about my capabilities, my intelligence, my potential, was a lie he told himself to justify how he'd used me." She advanced to the edge of the stage, the microphone a weapon in her hand. "You said I chose comfort over growth. The reality is that I chose survival over staying with someone who would have spent the rest of our lives diminishing me to elevate himself. You said I couldn't keep pace. The truth is that I lapped you so many times you never even saw me pass. The screen changed one final time, showing VH Capital's current holdings. Real estate portfolio technology investments, the cryptocurrency assets that still form the core of her wealth. All of it documented and verified and utterly undeniable. $2.1 billion, Donovan. That's what I did with the money you thought was mercy. That's what I built while you were giving speeches about integrity and hard work and surrounding yourself with people who share your values. She paused, let the number echo. And just so everyone understands, I make more in interest in a single day than you build in your best year. Your entire firm's annual revenue is a rounding error in my quarterly returns. The cruelty of the statement was deliberate, a mirror held up to every dismissive thing he'd ever said to her, every time he'd made her feel small and worthless and dependent on his generosity for basic survival. Augustus had moved closer to the stage, standing at attention like a sentinel, his presence reinforcing that this wasn't a breakdown or a fantasy, but a carefully orchestrated revelation backed by legal and financial documentation. As for helping me out quarterly, Cora's voice dropped, acquired a softness that was somehow more devastating than volume. I haven't received a single dollar from you since the divorce. Not one. That was another lie you told to make yourself look magnanimous while humiliating me in front of everyone we used to know. Bridget had started edging toward the exit, face frozen in an expression somewhere between horror and calculation, apparently deciding that proximity to Donovan's collapsing social capital was no longer strategically valuable. "Bridget, don't leave yet." Cora's voice stopped her mid-step. "There's something you should probably see." Augustus pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen, and suddenly the presentation system was showing surveillance photographs. Bridget and a man in a restaurant leaning close across a candlelit table. Bridget and the same man entering a hotel, her hand in his. Bridget and the man in what appeared to be an embrace, their body language intimate and unmistakable. "That's Ryan Thorne." Cora gestured to the screen. "Your business partner, your cousin, the man who's been sleeping with your fiancée for approximately 4 months based on our investigators' timeline." Donovan's head snapped toward Bridget, who'd gone from pale to ghostly, all blood drained from her face. The diamond on her finger caught the light, suddenly looking less like a promise and more like evidence. "The text messages are particularly illuminating." Augustus's voice carried across the ballroom, clinical and merciless. "Shall I read some excerpts?" He didn't wait for permission, pulling up screenshots on the screen. Conversations between Bridget and Ryan discussing their plan. "Marry Donovan, establish community property rights. Wait 6 months, file for divorce, split the firm equity that would become marital assets. After the wedding, we'll have access to everything. Donovan's too arrogant to notice what's happening. 6 months, baby. Then we file and you get half of his half of the firm. We'll be set." "He actually thinks I love him. It's almost sad." The messages appeared one after another, each one more damning, a documentary record of betrayal and calculation that made several people in the audience audibly gasp. Donovan was staring at Bridget, his expression moving through shock into something rawer, more vulnerable than Cora had ever seen. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something almost like sympathy. Then she remembered the $50,000, the casual cruelty of his speech, the 4 years of gaslighting and diminishment, and the sympathy evaporated. "You said different people have different thresholds for what they're willing to endure." Cora returned her attention to Donovan, let her voice carry across the ballroom. "You're right. My threshold for being treated as an accessory to someone else's ambition was exactly 4 years. My threshold for letting that define the rest of my life was 0. She set the microphone down on the stage, let it rest there with the finality of a gavel. The ballroom was silent except for breathing and the small sounds of shocked people processing information that fundamentally altered their understanding of reality. Augustus moved to the stage, collected the microphone, and addressed the crowd with the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding courtrooms. "VH Capital has no further business with Mr. Thorne or his associates. This matter is concluded." Cora descended the stairs, her legs steadier than she'd expected, adrenaline coursing through her system like electricity. Maggie was there immediately, pulling her into a fierce hug that felt like the only solid thing in a room that had gone liquid with shock. "Holy shit." Maggie's voice was awed, barely audible. "You actually did it. You burned it all down." Donovan was still standing in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by former classmates who'd backed away slightly, creating a circle of empty space around him, like he was radioactive. Bridget had made it to the exit, was disappearing through the doors, the train of her red dress the last thing visible before she vanished. Someone's phone chimed, then another, then several more. A cascade of notifications as word began spreading beyond the ballroom, texts and messages carrying the story outward into the world where it would metastasize into gossip and legend and cautionary tale. Donovan's phone was buzzing insistently. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and whatever he saw there made his face go even paler. His fingers moved, swiping through what Cora assumed were messages or notifications, his expression growing more devastated with each revelation. Augustus appeared at Cora's elbow, voice low enough that only she could hear. "The IRS information has started circulating. Someone in the investigation apparently leaked to a legal blog. It'll be in the mainstream press by morning." Cora nodded, felt the weight of what she'd set in motion. This wasn't just about humiliating Donovan at a reunion. This was about systematically dismantling the infrastructure of his life, revealing every lie, exposing every fraud, ensuring that the wreckage was so complete that reconstruction would be impossible. Donovan was moving toward her, pushing through the crowd, his face a mask of desperate confusion and rising anger. People stepped aside, creating a path, everyone aware that whatever happened next would be the climax of the evening's drama. He stopped 5 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough that Augustus could intercede if necessary. "You orchestrated this. All of it." His voice was hollow, scraped clean of the confidence that had filled it an hour ago. "I revealed the truth." Cora met his eyes, refused to look away. "Everything I showed tonight is documented, verified, and publicly available through appropriate legal channels. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I simply made sure everyone knew who you really are and what you really did." The IRS investigation is based on evidence of tax fraud your firm committed, multiple years of unreported income, shell company transfers, falsified deductions. VH Capital's forensic accounting team discovered it while reviewing your funding application. We had a legal obligation to report it. The phrasing was technically accurate while completely eliding the fact that she'd specifically ordered the deep financial investigation because she'd wanted to know exactly how vulnerable Donovan was, exactly where his structural weaknesses existed. "You destroyed me." The words came out broken raw. "My firm, my reputation, my everything. You destroyed it all because I didn't stay married to you." "No." Cora's voice was ice over steel. "I didn't destroy anything. You built a career on my money while claiming it was yours. You committed tax fraud to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. You allowed your fiancée and business partner to plan a scheme to defraud you of half your firm equity. I didn't destroy you. I just made sure everyone could see what you'd built, a house of cards on a foundation of lies." She stepped closer, dropped her voice so only he could hear. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. You made them believe I was weak, dependent, incapable of surviving without your quarterly charity. You rewrote our history to make yourself the hero and me the cautionary tale. Did you think there would be no consequences? Did you actually believe you could dismiss me as a failure while simultaneously begging for investment from a company I own?" Donovan's jaw worked, searching for words that wouldn't come. His phone buzzed again, insistent, and he ignored it. "The $5 million you asked for, that would have saved your firm. The cash flow problems, the debt from the office expansion, the partner disputes. That investment would have solved everything." Cora let the information settle, watched understanding dawn across his face. "I read your application thoroughly. I knew exactly how desperate you were. And I said no because I will not fund the career I already paid for once." She turned to Augustus. "We're done here." Augustus nodded, gestured toward the exit, and together they started walking, leaving Donovan standing in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the ruins of his carefully constructed narrative. The crowd parted silently as they passed, and Cora could feel their eyes, their reassessment of everything they'd believed about her, about Donovan, about the divorce that had happened 8 years ago and apparently never ended. Maggie fell into step beside her, and the three of them walked out of the ballroom through the lobby into the cool night air of the parking lot where Augustus's Bentley waited, patient and expensive as a promise kept. The Bentley's interior smelled like leather and old money, the kind of vehicle where silence felt less like absence and more like a statement of intent. Cora sat in the back, Maggie beside her, while Augustus occupied the front passenger seat, and his driver navigated them through Westchester's tree-lined streets back toward the city. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. The adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving Cora hollow and trembling in ways she couldn't quite control. She'd imagined this moment for 6 years, the reveal, the recognition, the systematic demolition of Donovan's carefully constructed mythology. Now that it had happened, she felt nothing like she'd expected. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound exhaustion that seemed to originate in her bones. Maggie's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed gently. "You okay?" "I don't know." Cora's voice sounded strange to her own ears, disconnected and floating. "I thought I'd feel different, vindicated or powerful or something. Instead, I just feel tired. Revenge is like that." Augustus turned in his seat, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. "The anticipation is more satisfying than the execution. You spend years imagining the moment, and when it finally arrives, you realize you're just as damaged as you were before. The wound doesn't heal just because you've inflicted one in return." "Then why did you help me do it?" "Because you asked. And because some people deserve to understand the consequences of their cruelty, even if that understanding doesn't repair what they broke." He paused, considering. "Also, Donovan Thorne is a particularly odious example of the type of man who mistakes extraction for partnership. The legal profession has too many of them already." Cora's phone was vibrating constantly, a percussion of notifications that she'd been ignoring since they left the ballroom. Messages from former classmates, requests for comment from business journalists who'd apparently gotten word of the evening's revelations, 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. She opened the text thread, scrolling through messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, the sudden social interest that came with revealed wealth and power. The hypocrisy was so transparent it might have been funny if it weren't so predictable. These were the same people who'd looked at her with pity an hour ago, who'd nodded along when Donovan painted her as a cautionary tale. She deleted the messages without responding, then checked her email. The top item made her breath catch. Sender Donovan Thorne, subject, "I'm sorry." She almost deleted it unread. Almost. But some terrible curiosity made her tap the message open. "Cordelia. I don't know where to begin. Tonight was I have no words. You're right. About everything. The inheritance, the way I treated you, the credit I took for work you did. I've spent the last hour trying to understand how I became someone capable of what I did to you, and I don't have an answer. Maybe that's worse than anything that I destroyed you casually without even the excuse of deliberate malice. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, profoundly sorry. Not because you're successful now and I need something from you, but because you deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved partnership and respect and recognition, and I gave you dismissal and condescension and erasure. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you won, completely, and I finally understand what I lost." Cora read it twice, searching for the manipulation she knew had to be embedded in the apology. But beneath the craft, she detected something that might have been genuine remorse. Not enough to matter, not enough to undo 8 years of damage, but present nonetheless. She showed the email to Maggie, who read it and made a sound of pure contempt. "He's trying to get ahead of the narrative, make himself the repentant villain who learned and grew." "I know." Cora deleted the email, then powered off her phone entirely. The silence that followed felt like relief. Augustus cleared his throat. "I'm going to give you advice you didn't ask for, which is one of the privileges of being old and having witnessed more of these situations than I care to count." "Go ahead." "What you're feeling right now, this emptiness, this sense that the victory didn't deliver what it promised, is normal. you spent 6 years building toward tonight. Your entire identity became organized around proving Donovan wrong. Now that you've done it, you're left with a question you weren't prepared to answer, which is, who are you when you're not defined by opposition to him? Augustus's voice was gentle, the tone of someone delivering difficult truth with compassion. You built VH Capital to prove you didn't need his support or validation. You succeeded beyond anyone's reasonable expectations. But success built on negation eventually runs out of fuel. You have to find something to build toward instead of away from. The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Cora stared out the window, watching the city slide past. I don't know who I am outside of this. The admission felt dangerous. Everything I've done for 6 years has been about getting to tonight. Now that it's done, I just feel unmoored. Augustus nodded. Lost. Which is why I'm suggesting you take time to figure out what you actually want instead of what you want to prove. The Bentley pulled up in front of her building. Cora gathered her clutch, paused before exiting. Thank you, Augustus, for everything. You're welcome. Now go get some sleep and try not to spend the next week obsessively checking how the story's spreading. It won't change anything. She promised she wouldn't, knowing it was a lie they were both aware of, and climbed out into the cool October night. Sleep was impossible. She changed into running clothes and ran through Manhattan's empty streets until her lungs burned and thinking became impossible. 4 miles, 5-6. She ran until the only reality was breath and pavement and the rhythmic percussion of her footsteps. She returned as dawn broke, showered, and sat at her desk to face the thing Augustus had warned her not to do. Financial media had exploded. The story was everywhere: Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, CNBC, every business publication that cared about wealth and scandal and high-stakes revenge. Secret billionaire confronts ex-husband at high school reunion. VH Capital CEO reveals identity after public humiliation. From $50,000 to $2.1 billion, the crypto success story nobody saw coming. She clicked through articles, each one recycling the same narrative. None of them understood this wasn't about revenge or success or justice. It was about a woman who'd spent 6 years building a life to fill a void that kept expanding no matter how much wealth she poured into it. Her work phone rang, the Seattle founder she was supposed to talk to this morning. Cora answered, kept her voice professional. Melissa, good morning. Ms. Ashwood. The voice trembled with barely controlled panic. I saw the news. I had no idea VH Capital was... I didn't realize... The fundamentals of your business haven't changed overnight. Cora pulled up the pitch deck. Tell me where you are with beta testing. They talked for 45 minutes about user acquisition and market challenges. Melissa's panic gradually subsided as the conversation focused on problems with solutions instead of celebrity. I'm going to recommend we move forward with a $2 million seed investment. Cora made the decision on instinct. But use half for runway extension and half for a proper marketing hire. You're trying to do everything yourself and it's not sustainable. Ms. Ashwood, I thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll build something worth the investment. Cora's voice softened. And call me Cora. After they hung up, she stared at her computer screen at the cascade of notifications representing the public consumption of her private devastation. She'd thought revealing herself would feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like exposure. Her personal phone buzzed. Maggie, you're all over the news. How are you holding up? Cora typed back. Fine. Working. Liar. I'm coming over tonight with food and the emotional support you're going to pretend you don't need. At 7 p.m., Maggie arrived with Thai food and wine and aggressive compassion. You look terrible. She unpacked containers with practiced efficiency. When's the last time you ate? This morning, probably. Eat. Then we're going to talk about the fact that you just destroyed your ex-husband's entire life and look like you attended your own funeral. Cora picked at the food, managing a few bites before setting down her fork. Augustus said something in the car about revenge not healing the wound, just inflicting a new one. He's right. You didn't do this for healing. You did it for justice, or maybe just to make sure Donovan understood what he'd thrown away. Maggie poured wine. And now that he does, now I figure out who I am when I'm not defined by proving him wrong. Exactly. Maggie's voice was gentle but unyielding. You built VH Capital because you needed to become undeniable. You succeeded. The question is whether you can build something for yourself instead of against him. I don't know how to do that. The admission felt like failure. Everything I've done since the divorce has been about getting to last night. Then make a plan. Maggie reached across the table, took Cora's hand. You're 32 years old with $2 billion and no obligations except the ones you create. Figure out what you actually want, not what you want to prove, but what would make you happy if nobody was watching. The question hung like a challenge. What did she want? Cora realized with uncomfortable clarity that she had no idea. She'd spent her 20s subordinating her desires to Donovan's ambition and her 30s building wealth as proof of independence. She'd never stopped to consider whether success was the same as satisfaction. That night, alone in her penthouse, she made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. She called Augustus. I want to establish a foundation, $50 million dedicated to supporting women rebuilding after divorce, seed funding for businesses, educational scholarships, legal assistance. His voice carried approval. The Phoenix Fund, rising from ashes. I'll have the paperwork drawn up. I want Maggie to run it. She's the only person I trust to actually help instead of performing charity. They discussed logistics and structure. When they hung up, Cora felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a flicker of purpose that had nothing to do with Donovan, nothing to do with revenge, nothing to do with proving capacity to someone who no longer mattered. 3 months crawled past. November bled into December, and Cora watched the aftermath unfold through news alerts and legal filings. Thorne and Associates filed for bankruptcy in mid-November. The IRS investigation expanded federal prosecutors building a case around systematic fraud. The firm's attorneys scattered, and the Tribeca office went up for lease. Bridget deleted her social media after the engagement ring showed up on eBay listed as slightly used symbol of manipulation with a starting bid of $1. It sold for $87,000. Donovan vanished from public life. His LinkedIn showed a contract attorney position in New Jersey, billing hours on document review at a fraction of his former earnings. His Tribeca loft sold in a short sale, and he'd moved to a rental in Astoria. The irony wasn't lost on Cora. He was living the life he'd imagined for her, the modest existence he'd pitied in his reunion speech. She'd thought knowing about his downfall would feel satisfying. Instead, it just felt empty. The Phoenix Fund launched in early March with a quiet announcement that generated more attention than anticipated. Applications flooded in women who'd lost everything to divorce who were starting over with nothing but determination and desperate hope. Maggie interviewed candidates with fierce compassion. Together they selected the first cohort of 15 women, each receiving $50,000 in seed funding, 6 months of mentorship, and access to legal resources. Cora attended the first gathering in late March, standing in the foundation's Brooklyn office, watching these women introduce themselves and their dreams. I'm starting a catering business focused on dietary restrictions. I'm building an app connecting single mothers with affordable childcare. I'm finishing my law degree so I can help other women navigate divorce. Each story was a variation on survival reinvention, the stubborn insistence on becoming more than the worst thing that had happened to them. Cora listened and felt something crack open in her chest, some calcified grief finally beginning to soften. After the meeting, a woman approached with hesitance. Ms. Ashwood, I just wanted to say thank you. The funding means I can quit my third job and actually focus on building something sustainable. Cora looked at this woman, 35, exhausted, carrying hope like a fragile thing, and saw herself 8 years ago sitting in that Astoria apartment wondering if $50,000 was enough to build a future. Call me Cora. She extended her hand, felt the grip, calloused, strong. And you're going to do more than survive. You're going to build something that makes your ex-husband choke on his own assumptions. The woman laughed, surprised and relieved, and in that moment Cora understood why the Phoenix Fund mattered in ways VH Capital never could. This wasn't about accumulation or proving capacity. This was about creating the support structure she'd needed 8 years ago, the belief that starting over wasn't failure, but transformation. May brought the Forbes Women's Summit invitation, a request for Cora to speak about her journey to share insights about building wealth in male-dominated industries. She'd spent 6 years avoiding this visibility. Now, standing backstage at the Manhattan venue, she felt the weight of exposure in ways she hadn't anticipated. The moderator was a journalist who'd covered VH Capital extensively, writing profiles that managed to be both admiring and skeptical. They settled into chairs on stage, the audience a sea of faces, women who'd built businesses and careers and lives that defied conventional expectations. "Let's start with the obvious question." The moderator smiled. $50,000 to $2.1 billion in 6 years. How did you do it? Cora had prepared answers emphasizing research and risk tolerance. But sitting on stage, she found herself saying something different. "I was angry, furious. My ex-husband had convinced me I was nothing without his support, that my contributions were negligible, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps he left me." She paused. "I took that $50,000 and invested it in cryptocurrency because I needed to prove he was wrong. Not to him, he was irrelevant. To myself. I needed to know I could survive and succeed and build something extraordinary without anyone's permission." The audience was silent, intent. So revenge was the motivating factor. Revenge was the spark. But building VH Capital required more than anger. It required discipline and research and the willingness to endure years of people assuming I was delusional or lucky rather than competent. Cora's voice steadied. "The question isn't how I turned 50,000 into billions. The question is why I needed to. And the answer is that I'd spent 4 years being told I wasn't enough, and I decided to become undeniable. And now that you are, does it feel like you expected?" Cora thought about the hollow months after the reunion, about the slow realization that success without purpose was just emptiness. No. Success built entirely on proving someone wrong eventually runs out of fuel. You achieve the thing you set out to prove, and then you're left wondering what comes next. She looked directly at the audience. "Which is why I started the Phoenix Fund. $50 million dedicated to supporting women rebuilding after divorce, because I remember what it felt like to start over with nothing. That work, helping other women avoid the isolation I experienced, that feels meaningful in ways accumulating wealth never did." The interview continued with questions about investment strategy and maintaining anonymity. But Cora kept returning to the Phoenix Fund, to the realization that building towards something mattered more than building away from someone. When they opened for audience questions, a woman in the third row stood, voice shaking. "Ms. Ashwood, I'm going through a divorce now. My husband is a prominent attorney, and his lawyers are arguing I contributed nothing despite supporting his career for 8 years. I have no assets, no income, and I'm terrified. What would you tell someone in my position?" The question dragged Cora back to that courthouse 8 years ago, to the moment when the judge had agreed her contributions were voluntary gifts rather than investments deserving return. She stood, walked to the edge of the stage, looked directly at the woman. "I'd tell you that you're stronger than you know, that the person trying to convince you of your worthlessness is wrong, catastrophically wrong, and time will prove it. I'd tell you to document everything, every contribution you made, every sacrifice you endured, every promise he broke. And I'd tell you to apply to the Phoenix Fund, because supporting women like you is exactly why it exists." The woman was crying, and Cora felt her own eyes burning. "You're not nothing. You're someone rebuilding. And rebuilding is harder and braver than maintaining what already exists. Remember that when his lawyers try to make you feel small, you're not small. You're someone who survived and decided to keep going, and that makes you stronger than anyone who never had to start over." The applause that followed felt different from polite recognition. This was understanding solidarity, the collective sound of women who'd endured similar dismissals and recognized truth when they heard it. After the summit, Cora returned to her office and found an email waiting. Subject: application, Phoenix Fund. She opened it, read the woman's story, the familiar pattern of support and sacrifice and eventual abandonment, At the bottom, a single sentence that made her chest tighten. "Thank you for showing me that starting over isn't failure. It's just the beginning of a different story." Cora approved the application immediately. That evening she stood at her penthouse windows watching Manhattan's lights blur into constellations of ambition and broken promises, and she thought about Donovan. Not with rage anymore or even satisfaction at his downfall. Just with a kind of distant acknowledgement that he'd been part of her story but didn't get to write her ending. Her phone buzzed. "Maggie, next cohort applications are in. 200 women applying for 15 spots, ready to pick the ones angry enough to build something extraordinary." Cora smiled, typed back, "Absolutely." Because anger, she'd learned, wasn't the enemy of healing. It was fuel for transformation energy that could destroy or create depending on how you channeled it. She'd spent 6 years destroying Donovan's assumptions about her capacity. Now she was spending her energy creating support for women who needed permission to believe they could survive and succeed and build futures that looked nothing like the past that had broken them. She pulled up her email one final time, saw a message from Augustus with the subject line, "Epilogue." Inside was a single news article published that afternoon. Donovan Thorne accepts plea deal in federal tax fraud case, 18 months. Probation, $340,000 in restitution, disbarment, proceedings initiated. Below it, Augustus had written, "The system worked slowly and imperfectly. He won't practice law again. The empire he built on your inheritance is gone. The question now is what you build with yours." Cora read the article once, then closed it. Donovan's fate was no longer her concern. He'd face consequences for his fraud, lose the career he'd valued above everything, and spend whatever remained of his life understanding that shortcuts and exploitation eventually caught up with you. She opened a new document, began drafting an expansion plan for the Phoenix Fund. Double the cohort size, add educational grants, establish partnerships with law firms willing to provide pro bono divorce representation. The work consumed her attention until midnight, until the city outside her windows had quieted to the particular hum of New York at rest. When she finally closed her laptop, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before her marriage, a sense of purpose that came from creation rather than destruction, from building up rather than tearing down. The woman who'd signed divorce papers for $50,000 was gone. The woman who'd revealed herself at the reunion was already fading. What remained was someone still figuring out who she was when she wasn't defined by opposition. Still learning that success meant more than accumulation. Still discovering that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but transformation. Cordelia Ashwood, 32 years old, $2 billion, and finally understanding that proving everyone wrong was just the beginning. The real work was deciding what to prove them right about. She walked to her bedroom, caught her reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in 8 years, she recognized the woman looking back. Not Donovan's dismissed ex-wife, not the secret billionaire hiding behind corporate structures, just Cora. Someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself, someone who'd turned $50,000 into an empire and then realized empires were just monuments to loneliness unless you used them to build something that mattered. Tomorrow she'd wake up and continue the work. The Phoenix Fund would grow, more women would be funded, more lives would be transformed. Donovan would fade into irrelevance, a footnote in a story that was no longer about him. But tonight, standing in her fortress of glass and steel and carefully constructed isolation, Cora allowed herself something she hadn't permitted in 6 years. She let go of the anger that had fueled her ascent, of the need to prove herself to a man who no longer mattered, of the belief that success was measured by how thoroughly you destroyed the people who'd underestimated you. She let it all go, felt it drain away like water through open fingers. And what remained was lighter, cleaner, more real than anything she'd built on the foundation of rage. The city glittered below her, infinite and indifferent and beautiful in its chaos. Somewhere out there, women were waking up to divorce papers and custody battles and the terrifying prospect of starting over with nothing. And now, because of the Phoenix Fund, because of the fortune she'd built from $50,000 in fury, and the stubborn refusal to accept someone else's definition of her worth, some of them would have a chance she'd never had. Support, belief, the knowledge that starting over wasn't failure but courage. That was the real revenge. Not Donovan's destruction, but her transformation into someone who could prevent other women from enduring what she'd survived alone. Cora climbed into bed, pulled the covers close and closed her eyes. For the first time in 6 years, she fell asleep without dreaming of the reunion, without rehearsing the reveal, without imagining Donovan's face when he finally understood what he'd lost. She dreamed instead of the women she'd fund tomorrow, the lives she'd change, the futures she'd help build. And when she woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked an empire she'd created from nothing, Cordelia Ashwood smiled. Not because she'd won, but because she'd finally figured out what winning actually meant.